Welcome back to the third installment of In the Wheat. Just a reminder that this is the story of a young boy who was looking for God. He entered the seminary and began a life of search. I am following up on a book of poems that I wrote back in 1991 and am viewing them now from my perspective at this time in 2024. We find ourselves now in the refectory for breakfast. The superior would say the grace before meals, and we would be seated. Then a lecturer would sit up on a high platform and read, and he would start off by saying,
"Whether you eat or drink, or whatsoever else you do, do all for the glory of God."
after which a reading from the New Testament would follow, or from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Then, if the superior found it fitting, he would ring a bell, and we could start to talk for the first time that day. It was silence that ruled our day in the seminary. Silence was of utmost importance, and we were kept to it by the rule.
We were told to live in silence, like seeds have in soil, that we might one day break through and flower. But we preferred our cell-like chapel, where fragrance breathed from linen and wood. And you could lure us with faint scents of liturgies performed. So we lingered there and forgot about the flowering.
They told us that silence was a discipline that we had to learn, so as to keep our inner life quiet and calm. They even had a word for it. They said we should be recollected, that we should keep our minds on the things of God.
You said things to us in silence that fell into deep furrows of understanding. So changed were we, that only on reading about Francis did we begin to fathom what had happened to us.
In the beginning, I found it difficult, but as time went on, I began to discover that something precious was in the silence.
We read the books of silence and nothingness, and began to understand things that stirred in them, like longing and fire, and brushed the other books aside.
After entering this world of silence and nothingness, it was both elating and confusing.
After we had lost ourselves in you, did you notice how so many things ceased to upset us, or rob us of our balance? And did you notice how calm we stayed when lightning struck the pine tree right outside the study hall?
It opened up a whole new space for me, a whole new area where I could be concentrated on something uninterrupted. Learning to live in silence was a prerequisite for contemplation, but we didn't have any idea what that meant at that time. Now, alongside the spiritual side of seminary life, our main occupation was learning, was schoolwork. We followed the normal requirements for the state of Indiana, like all high schools did. But it seemed that, to me, one of the most important things we learned in school was Latin, the required language for a candidate for the priesthood, of course.
We knew you expected Latin from us. So we studied it. To make our tongues say those words you wanted. But sulked when Cicero was given all that attention. In your stead.
For me, Latin was the language the priest used at Mass to say the prayers, to fulfill the liturgy. I had no idea about Cicero or Caesar or what we were supposed to learn. Now, don't forget, we were just teenage boys, 13, 14, 15 years old, and we had no idea about the theory of language, about grammar, and we had to learn all these things with effort. The Latin that we learned by heart. The Latin that the nuns taught us, but this was something different.
How we learned the countless columns of words. In Latin, French and Greek. Stacking them to reach you with. We, masons in Babel. Till they fell down around us. And we, with dusty tongues, sat speechless on our hills of rubble.
We worked our way through the declensions and the conjugations and the strict rules of language, thinking that it would bring us closer to you. But that was not the case.
You speak a different language that only boys burning with fervor are able to understand and translate into fervent spiritual desire.
Yes, we learned Latin from sheer exposure to it. Latin was all around us. And with time, it became a useful vehicle. Later, in the study of philosophy, we would write our examinations in Latin.
We wanted to hear someone tell us about you, but they always talked on your periphery, as if to keep us from boring.
Yes, after all, it was you that we were looking for. It was you who brought us there It was you who made something of our life. It was you, we thought. There was nobody around who we could confront with this question about coming close to you. We were left on our own, and everyone looked for his own way. This was a problem that was on my mind. I didn't know where to start. I asked myself, should I read books on theology to find out about God? And I came to the conclusion that the only way for me was to learn to love God. But how was I supposed to do that? Well, I didn't know. But I thought maybe I should learn to love like my affair, well, not affair, but my little girl in grade school, 5th grade, 6th grade, my little sweetheart of those days, maybe I loved her. Maybe that is how I have to learn to love God. Well, to my boyish way of thinking, if I wanted that little girl, I had to feel something deep inside of me for her. And having that, I thought that would spring over to her like a fire and let her know my feelings.
You haven't forgotten all those moments I had with you. In closed rooms of intimacy. Have you? Or did you perhaps, later, when others came, who might have learned to love you better?
Yes, maybe loving meant longing, a burning desire. Maybe that was the answer. God would know, and God would respond.
We loved you for no other reason than that we wanted to. For we came to you with full volition. That was older than we, and had been stirring in us since we were 3.